What comes to your mind when you think of the word law? For me, and probably for you in our time in history, in our context, you probably think of things like courts or the police or jail or rules, or maybe complicated phrases like Section 3B in the Title VI document on local traffic ordinances, or complicated phrases like that. That is a very modern Western understanding of law, and not necessarily how the people of the Old Testament of Israel thought of their law, how they thought of the word law. Today we're going to be looking at the law in the first 5 books of the Bible and trying to understand it a little better. And this is probably one of the most complicated, difficult things to understand in the Old Testament. So let me start by asking the question, why should we care about this law? Why should we care about the law of the Old Testament? And there's a lot of good answers, but I'm going to give you a few short, simple ones. Maybe not conclusive or totally encapsulating, but I think these are some simple things that make us understand why we should care about this. So first, God wrote and gave the law to his people, and so we should really care about anything that God writes and instructs and gives to the world. Second, the law points forward to the coming of Christ. It makes the people of the Old Testament long for the coming of Christ, the fulfillment of God's promises, especially to Eve and to Abraham. So we'll talk about that more in just a minute. So let me tell you, this is probably going to be one of the most academic, structured lessons that we've done in this series so far. It really is a little bit shorter, so pay attention and try and take away what I'm trying to get across here, because it's important to understanding the Old Testament. And I want it to be organized, I want it to be clear. So let's get into it. The first thing I want to be clear about is that when we read the law of the Old Testament, it can seem pretty boring and even annoying and tedious. But once again, that's not necessarily how the people of Israel thought of it. And if you read how the authors of the Psalms and the Proverbs, especially King David and others, how they wrote about it, they write about it in a way that is life-giving, that is protective. They rejoice in God's law. They are thankful for God's law. It really means life-giving instruction, not necessarily rules and ordinances and boring phrases the way we think of it. The Israelites really thought of it as life-giving instruction for them. So how is the word law used in the first 5 books of the Bible, where it's given, where it's written about? Well, in Exodus 19 through 24, it's kind of used as Israel's constitution. It describes Israel's constitution. We have a constitution for the United States about how we're supposed to live, interact with one another, and interact with government. So in Exodus 19 through 24, the law is kind of Israel's constitution, how the nation should be governed and how it's supposed to relate to God and to other nations. In Leviticus, this is a long, kind of complicated book that talks a lot about ceremonial and sacrificial laws for priests, for people coming to offer sacrifices when they sin, or when there was a new priest or a new child born. There's a bunch of ceremonial laws and rituals that they are ordered to perform. And then in Deuteronomy, it's kind of a comprehensive explanation of the law, of Israel's constitution, and what will happen if they don't obey the law, if they don't listen to God's law. So that's kind of how the word law is used in those first 5 books. Okay, next we need to look at what was the purpose of the law. And this is where there's a lot of debate and it gets kind of complicated. So we're going to keep it a little bit more general and try and get some things that are agreed upon. So the main purpose of the law is pretty general, but it was simply the way God chose to relate to his people at this point in history. Again, this is the law of the Old Testament was the way that God chose to relate to his people, how he was expressing himself to them, how he revealed himself to them, and how they were to relate and interact with him. One of the main effects of the law was that it made sin obvious. It made humanity's shortcomings and flaws obvious. It shows the people how weak and sinful and unable to please God they are. It revealed that in their hearts. When you give someone a huge list of things to do, it really quickly shows how limited they are and how unable they are to complete that massive list. Another purpose of the law was, well, let me get at it this way. One of the purposes of the law was not a way to earn favor with God. And this is a misunderstanding that many people have, and that's because the Pharisees in Jesus' time, that's how they interpreted and understood the law. They thought it was a way of scoring points with God, of earning favor with God. And if you read just the Old Testament, you can see that that's not exactly how the law is given or why it's given. The law also did not require sinless perfection, as the Pharisees understood it. You even look at the story of King David, who was a really good Jew, and he breaks the law in certain places or for certain reasons, but he's not sinless and perfect, right? So another thing that we need to understand about the law is that the curses listed in Deuteronomy, there's a bunch of blessings and curses for the nation if they follow the law or if they disobey the law. They were not meant to just punish the people. Those curses were not meant to just punish the people. They were meant to get their attention, to turn them back to God, and to show them the blessing that came from walking in obedience to God. Think of it the way you would think of a parent disciplining a child who ran out in the street, right? You would discipline the child because they disobeyed, but also because you're trying to protect the child. You're trying to show them that this is dangerous, that this is not good for them. So that's kind of what those blessings and curses are, especially in Deuteronomy. Some of the purposes of the food laws, there's lots of complicated laws about when the Israelites can eat and what they can eat and how they can eat. But one of the purposes was to keep them from interacting with other nations who were once again harmful to the people of Israel. There were many nations who had wicked practices and traditions like child sacrifice that God was trying to keep the Israelites from interacting from. Think about it in this way. It'd be pretty hard to be friends with somebody, to interact with them, to hang out with them, if you can't even sit down and have a meal together and eat the same things or eat the same things in the same way. So that was one of the reasons God gave those complicated food laws. So those are some of the purposes of the law. Another good question that we need to ask is, why do we as Christians not follow the law today, right? We kind of inherited the faith of the Old Testament, the faith of the Israelites through Christ, but we don't follow a lot of those same laws. Well, once again, we don't follow those laws because it's not a way of scoring points with God. It's not the Pharisaical understanding of the law. We don't have to score points. We also don't follow the law because, once again, it was the constitution of a different nation. We are not ethnically, genetically Jews. We are not Israelites, so we don't follow the constitution of that nation. And then probably the most final one is that Jesus has fulfilled and completed those laws for us, especially the sacrificial laws. For example, once again, God gave Israel rules that said that when they sinned against God, they had to offer a sacrifice for that sin. It was a reminder that sin costs something. It was a reminder that sin had a penalty, that there was blood to be paid for that sin. Now, for us, Christ has made the ultimate sacrifice so that no more sacrifices for sin have to be made. Think about it like this. In the Old Testament, when you sinned in a particular way, you offered maybe a bird or a goat. How much greater of a sacrifice is a human, and how much greater of a sacrifice is God himself come in human flesh? Because of that great sacrifice, we don't have to offer sacrifices for sin anymore. Jesus has done that for us. So that's probably the main reason we don't follow the law of the Old Testament. So to finish up and kind of summarize, the law was not a legalistic way of scoring points with God. People were not saved by following the law and scoring points with God in that way. It was life-giving instruction that helped the Israelites relate to God, interact with God, and it helped them from mingling with nations and peoples that were dangerous to them. And it reminded them of their sin and their need for God. One final thing. The Israelites knew their history, and they knew of Adam and Eve's sin. They knew that the struggle of keeping the law and making animal sacrifices and eating a certain way was an effect of the fall. See, Adam and Eve didn't relate to God the way the Israelites related to God. And so they knew that that was an effect of Adam and Eve's sin. They knew that it was at the cost of sin, or because of sin, that they had to relate to God in this way. So the law was a reminder of sin, and it made them look forward to a time when God would fulfill his promises and crush the head of the snake, and they would be able to relate to God in a much more personal, a much less complicated way. So that's kind of an overview of the law and how we should understand that as we read through it.